You're listening to My Viewfinder. I release a new episode every week on Friday. Hit that subscribe button and don't miss out on any of these awesome conversations. My Viewfinder is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown, community supported. This episode was brought to you by the Calgary Foundation. Whether it's funding anti-racism programs, addiction recovery, or food hampers for the hungry, for 65 years, the Calgary Foundation has proudly supported the charitable community to address some of Calgary's biggest challenges. Now, during this period of unprecedented urgent needs, Calgary Foundation renewed its commitment to building a healthy, vibrant, giving, caring, and resilient community. If you're a registered charity looking for a grant, a professional advisor creating a giving plan for your client, or a donor wanting to give back to community, discover a wealth of resources at calgaryfoundation.org and learn more about their work through Calgary Foundation's Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Today I sit down with Chelsea Yang Smith. I met Chelsea this summer through the Exposure Studio program. Chelsea is an artist here in Calgary who also works as a contract commercial photographer. She does all kinds of artsy stuff that I've seen on Instagram that are not photography related. In fact, as you'll hear, she has a more tempered and pragmatic approach to photography as a craft. And it's a realistic one that's allowed her to build a functioning working practice. In this first portion of our talk, I discover where this thought process comes from and her relationship with the photography world here in Calgary and as a craft in general. Okay, well, thanks for coming on then and not canceling, which is exciting. You know, what interests you? We were talking a little bit in email about representation, and I don't know if we want to get into specifically race or gender or anything, but is there anything that makes you feel like you need to express an opinion about?
Yeah, I don't know. It's been an interesting time for sure. I ended up having a long Instagram conversation with Brendan Stevens, who's like another photographer here in Calgary. We've never actually met in person. He just followed me on Instagram one day, and then we started talking, and we share a lot of similar ideologies when it comes to mannerisms and ways of working in the industry. And I was thinking a lot about the lack of mentorship and the kind of weird sexist hierarchy, alpha male kind of BS that is really prevalent in Calgary. And then I was also talking to my other friend who's also a photographer, David Clark, and he shoots a bunch of film. And he had called me because he needed some advice on a quote he was doing for some friends and just wanted some feedback. And I was like, oh yeah, sure. I'm happy to do that. And we were just talking about how it's a lot of the really established photographers are really secretive about sharing their tips of success or something, which I also think is bullshit. I'm knowledge is power. Passing on that stuff to emerging photographers only helps you in the long run, because then they're educating their clients on how to work, and then if you run into stuff down the road, it just only helps. The kind of scene, and Dave had gone to school in Falmouth and wants to go to London to work as a photo retoucher and kind of build his career over there. And one thing he had mentioned is Calgary is very small, but there's a lot of ego here, and it's really strange for how small the city is, because if that attitude was brought in, to I don't know, London, for example, or anywhere else in the world, people would just automatically be nope, you're not that big, you're not that important, it totally doesn't warrant that kind of behavior. So it's really weird that it's something that's experienced all in Calgary. And even with the Engender publication that I was working on, I kind of interviewed a couple of other female photographers in Calgary to kind of discuss this culture, and I still see it all the time. That was one of the reasons I joined Exposure Studio, was I really wanted to see if there was anything I could learn from it and pass on to other people. I really truly believe in mentorship. I think it makes you a better photographer. It challenges you to answer questions that you might not normally think of in your day-to-day, and it makes you better at your craft, I think, by teaching someone what it is or how to do it. And so, yeah, that was kind of my intention with Exposure, even though it was very against the grain for me in that like I try not to participate in a lot of like photography related events. Like usually for exposure month, I go to one or two events and I try to avoid conversations with like most of the, I would say, type of crowd that like attend these events, just because I don't really want to get stuck in a conversation about like, what gear do you shoot with? Why is Capture One better than this? I'm like, I don't care. I really truly don't care. So yeah, that it was an interesting experience. I thought it was interesting to hear a lot of photographers talk. I don't know why. I'll go on tangents if you don't stop me. So
This is exactly. I
okay.
don't even need to ask you primer questions. This is great.
Okay.
I mean, I will just to be that guy. But yeah, I mean, I already feel like I align with a lot of what you're talking about. I mean, the premise of this podcast is I also hate meeting photographers and having to talk about my camera. It's like, for fuck's sake, you know? And I have one, which I think shocks a lot of people. I have this little Micro Four Thirds, and I was talking to somebody, and I was like, "Yeah, I've shot a wedding," and they're like, "You shot a wedding on this camera?" I'm like, you know what? Let's move on. So I kind of want to talk to people about photography, although that sounds a little pretentious too, and maybe more just like, like your life, in the sense of these things that, interest you. I also think Calgary's a weird culture. I think it's tiered. I feel like when I meet folks like you, Calgary actually has this sort of, let's call it groundswell movement where people actually want to do right by each other, but at a certain, maybe it's an income bracket or fucking, I don't know, social hierarchy or generational wealth, or I don't know what it is. Usually
It's
rich, white, entitled
mostly,
white dudes, but
yeah.
yeah.
Well, the thing is like before digital came into play, like the really established photographers here in Calgary, like they've been shooting forever. They've been shooting before like digital was a thing. And like the issue with a lot of these, this like hierarchy is like one, agencies don't like taking risks on new people. And honestly, like these guys are like in their 40s and their 50s, like, and they're happy to stay in Calgary. They have families here, they have homes that they've purchased. Like you don't quite see this anomaly in places like New York where it's like the established photographers are in their 70s and that's because they've built their career in other places and then they've moved. But these photographers will not move. They have an established base. They're going to stay in Calgary and they probably won't retire for another 20 years. So when it comes to these like huge opportunities, they're already getting it. And agencies just won't take that risk. These clients won't because they want, that's a lot of, at least in my opinion, like why people pay so much for photography is you're paying for the guarantee that you're going to get exactly what you're asking for. And when these guys deliver time and time again, like there's no point to really look for anyone else. But that also brings in that kind of like, I don't want to say like traditional like hierarchy attitude kind of thing, because it's like a lot of it, you see it in the tattoo industry where like people starting out have to apprentice first. They have to clean up the shop. They have to pay their dues before they can even start tattooing. And that has kind of translated over to photography. I don't think so much today because of, there's classes, there's education, there's smaller opportunities, it's kind of like that structure, but there's ways around it. But I think that's why like those like old guard like photographers hold kind of that old ideology is why that's like still existing. And like the problem is too is they pass it, like there's a lot of photographers in Calgary, like I would say, who the only reason they're freelancing and they're successful is because they shot the shit with some of these like fucking photographers and they're grandfathered into the scheme because like the guys get to the point where they're like, I don't need this gig anymore, like I rather take a vacation, or I'm gonna pass it to this buddy, and then it just kind of like proliferates. So yeah, I definitely, it's very strange. It's like they're always at exposure events for some reason, but it's like the grandfathered dudes into this, who are quite not at that point, but are like getting these gigs. They come to these events because it's about the swagger, it's about the ego of being like, well, I shot this and I did this, and like I just find those events are like a big circle jerk of like stroking each other's egos. I'm just like, I don't care to participate in this.
Yeah, I'm just listening. I'm wondering. I don't know. As much as I think, there's. I don't know. Is it a trade craft culture where, like, you talk about tattooing? it's weird how that actually is prevalent in many of these careers that we wouldn't expect from even like some archaic shit like with like doctors should know better than to have a culture in which you're up for 48 hours. I mean, scientifically, they are taught and are well aware that you do not operate correctly on anything less than 8 hours of sleep. But then because they've just been doing it this way for 200 years, right? But bringing back the point of Calgary being smaller than it believes to be, it's interesting also culturally. My topical impression is much like you talk about agencies, that Calgary's got a weird cultural identity where it's not very, it doesn't seem on a surface to be very experimental, and they want this sort of not just reliability. I think they're set in looking a certain way, and it can be a little bit not frustrating. I don't know what the right word is, but challenging. Especially as I hang out with more and more young folks that are studying this or passionately interested, let's say in photography, art, or any sort of creative expression. They're hitting this wall, but we're creating sub-communities, which is great. And we get to meet each other and everything's going fine on that bottom rung. But bridging that gap to actually get a career built out of it is a fascinating thing. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it is about photography. I'm actually impressed that you have carved out a niche in some commercial freelancing for photography. One of my cynical ideas, actually brought up this idea of a robot, is that that's going to dry up pretty quickly too. I don't know. I feel like there's something going on with the role and importance of imagery where we worship it more than we ever have, but we don't respect the images. Maybe there's a symbiotic relationship there, but yeah, I mean, that's something I think about a lot. We did get that a couple of sort of themes with our speakers at Exposure Studio about, actually, I think we're talking about the same thing, sort of, Mark and Andrew Jackson, Mark Seeley talked about the word colonial and I'm Asian, as you can tell visually. People may not know that on the audio, but but I'm also, Toronto born, straight, married, have a kid. So I have a lot of privileges as it is. Something that I've been thinking a lot about even before with BLM and race and with gender and sexuality. But it strikes me too that even just being a woman is hard enough. Never mind being part of a truly marginalized group. And then the language in which we, let's say, take a picture or have representation in these roles is a fascinating problem. I mean, I don't know what your experience. Are you born here? Like, are you from Calgary or?
Yeah. My mom immigrated here from Burma, which is now called Myanmar, when she was, I think, 16, 14. So as you can tell, I speak very fluent English. I have had people say like, oh, you speak really fluent. And I'm always really confused by that because I'm like, well, yes, I was born here. So I don't know why there was that misconception that I would not speak fluent English. But that was a byproduct of my mom really wanting to make sure her kids spoke English very well because she is ESL. She still asks me how to spell certain things or like to proofread her emails or text messages before she sends them. And my dad is Caucasian. He's from Thunder Bay, Ontario, which is like, if anyone knows Thunder Bay, I would be surprised. It's really, I don't want to say like a backwater town, but like there's literally nothing to do there.
North Watertown, maybe.
Yeah, like I spent a summer there because we had to like help my grandmother move and there was nothing. Like it was like their source of water in the house was like well water, which is like yellow and smells like sulfur. And I was like, where are we? This is a horrible, horrible place to be. So I forgot what we were talking about, but like as a person who is like intersex, I guess, like two different identities, I've had to really kind of consider like what, like first of all, like where I even belong, which I think is a really common thing with biracial children is every, like my second sight series, I was taking portraits of friends and we were just talking about mixed race identity, and like the common thread throughout all of it was like growing up as a kid, like you didn't feel like you belonged in either place. Like I clearly, like as a kid, like I didn't really fit in with like the white kids at school, so I hung out with all the Asians and we all like compared our like test results and things. But then like I would go to Chinese school on the weekend because I wanted to like kind of really embrace my Asian identity, and all my friends went to Chinese school. So I was like, obviously I'll go to Chinese school. But then I was like the only white kid in the class, even though I'm not white. And so like I felt really uncomfortable in that aspect there too. And I went there for like 3 or 5 years. I don't speak any fluent Mandarin at all, despite being there for 5 years, which is like also like another facet of like children growing up biracial if they don't learn like one of their parents' languages. Like my mom never wanted me to learn Burmese because she's like, it's a useless language. You're literally never going to use it except inside the house. And so that was the reason for learning Mandarin, was like, they're like, Mandarin is like more spoken than Cantonese, even though all my friends speak Cantonese. And it's like, I have no one to practice with at home except my grandmother, who's like was a teacher in Burma, and so that's why she speaks Mandarin. But then even now, as like I go to restaurants, like I'm always like conscious of like the coding that I need to like, or the behavior I need to do to like, I don't want to say like assimilate, but like non-verbally communicate to like the dim sum cart lady that like, I get it, I'm also Asian. Like I'm like, I'll order my food like by the Asian names, you know, I'll like say like shish it like after she gives it to me. And like it's weird that I would take offense when like they'd come around and like give me a fork, because I'm just like, I've been using chopsticks since I was 7. But like that's the thing, is like I do kind of I white pass for the most part, and then you know when I'm entering these dominant white spaces in photography, even in the art community, I don't think people perceive me as Asian, like, or as a person of color. Like and it's because I play the role really well. You know, I've gone to schools, you know, I speak English really well. Like I've grown up here in Canada, in Calgary. Like I am indoctrinated to the colonial lens. This is all I've ever known. Like I've never even gone to Burma to meet any of my cousins or like my aunts. Like, so it's one part of me that I completely don't know anything about that side of that identity at all. So that was like a tangent about.
No, it's not a tangent at all. I have a similar thing. You know, growing up in Toronto is a little bit different, just because Toronto truly is, even in the 70s and 80s, a much bigger melting pot than Calgary is even today. And so, like, for example, my kindergarten picture, so that's like 1982, you know, I think it's less than 50% of the people in a North York elementary school are Caucasian. So, I grew up in a particularly unique experience, still colonial in the sense it's still Canada, and it's Canada in the 80s. So it's not like, people are encouraged and you end up in certain cultural spheres, but right, it's, you're in some kind of country, you're going to fold in. And so like you're talking about, I've had arguments with pizza line operators about how to spell my last name. And like, people, when they meet me, if they've only spoken to me on the phone, they'll be shocked because I sound like I don't want to say white per se, but I sound Canadian because I'm Canadian. But like you, for whatever reason, subconsciously or consciously, who cares now in reflection, but I did end up hanging out predominantly more with Asian people. But I had a chance to go to Korea when I was 19 in one of those not exchange, but student programs. And Korean people didn't hate me, but they fucking didn't like me. Because you walk into a place and they can tell you just by the way you dress, just by the way you look. And I got an opportunity with this program. I was going out to a bar or pool hall with like Korean people who were raised in Germany, who were raised in India, who were raised in Brazil. And even amongst us, we're just like, holy fuck, like, you look different, you speak different. We're all, first or second generation Korean. So all our parents probably look identical in a cultural sense, but just being in a different environment, getting exposed to different amount of sun, wearing different, eating different foods, you get such a fascinating diversity, really. But in particular, when you brought up growing up and not being able to learn a language. So my son is essentially trilingual. So my wife is Taiwanese. So Helen speaks English, of course, Mandarin, a little bit of Taiwanese. I'm Korean, nominally. And so my son is going to be mixed race, although nobody will ever be able to tell by looking at him. I don't speak Korean, at least not at home. I speak like a 2-year-old child to my parents, of course. But so he doesn't have any grounding in Korean at all. My wife still speaks to her family in Mandarin, so he actually went to Mandarin school. He started picking up really quickly because it is in the back, but he doesn't retain it because we speak to him in English because I don't speak Mandarin either. And so it will be interesting if I were a crazy sociological scientist to monitor his development, right? And just be like, oh, I'm noticing in the first 10 years of your life, you're speaking this way. But so I do kind of understand. Moving back to kind of like, do you think that informs not just your work in photography, but like, is that why you started taking pictures? I don't know. Is there a relationship? When did you pick up camera manipulation? Like, what's the story with cameras?
I would say maybe I had a very like non-traditional approach to photography as some people. Like I did not follow the photography route at all. Like I've always been really into art. High school, I took all my art classes. I was an art AP. I went to the pre-college program at ACAD, and I was like, I really like drawing and painting. I'm probably going to go into drawing when I go to art school, which was also supposed to be just a one-year thing. It was like most kids, I don't say white kids, but like most white kids take a year off between high school and post-secondary, and they call it their gap year, and they go and travel or whatever. But my mom was like, we want you to do like an MRI program at state. We want you to work in healthcare because healthcare always needs people. And I was like, well, I want to go to art school really bad. And I feel like I just need to explore this so I know what I'm missing out on. So I'm going to spend my gap year going to art school. And I took like all my core classes. I realized I'm not amazing at drawing after being in a class full of people who were all artists. I was like, I'm okay. I'm not the worst, but I don't think I'm cut out for this. And I took a photography class, and that was literally probably the first time I picked up like a DSLR. Like I had one, I was shooting auto though. I didn't know what the heck aperture or shutter speed was. And I like kind of learned about it in class. I learned a little bit about photo manipulation. I think like at the time, my editing skills were like, I was using like some online digital editor thing that just basically was like early Instagram. It just applied filters to things. Like I literally didn't know anything about Photoshop. And that was kind of my introduction to photography. And after that, I kind of dropped out for a semester out of pressure for my parents to like go back to school and upgrade and get into the program they wanted me to get into. And then I quit that about like halfway because I was like, art school, I'm like, there's something better out there and I don't have to do this. So then I came back for the other semester, and I was really stuck between glass blowing and photography, which I think people are always surprised about because they're like, that is like two opposite sides of the spectrum. And I've never really worked with like three-dimensional stuff. I just really loved glass blowing. I think they always kind of joke people who are glass blowers are like a little bit like pyromaniacs because it's a lot of just fire. But I couldn't really see, I guess, like a career in glass blowing. It's like very expensive to start a studio. It's hard to get access. And so I thought about photography, and it's still the case here, but ACAD's photography program is a Bachelor of Design, which in my head, I was like, a Bachelor of Design sounds more established than the Bachelor of Fine Arts. And I feel like I'll find more work at the Bachelor of Design than a BFA. So I went into the photography program that following year, and that was kind of my I guess like pathway to like figuring it out. Like I like bless Kathy Simone, who was my Photoshop teacher, because she was extremely thorough. Like I have learned everything under the sun. I mean, I'm still learning. There's always things to learn, but like I would not be as comfortable and knowledgeable in Photoshop as I am now if it wasn't for her. And I had some okay teachers that like, you know, like they're really great at helping you conceptualize projects and things like that. But like by the time I had graduated, I knew how to take photos. Like I knew the technical stuff. And that was something I really focused on my degree. Some of my classmates focused on like building commercial portfolios. Some were just doing like fine art kind of stuff. I always kind of felt really divided in between. And I think this is just like a common discourse in my life. Being biracial is like, I'm always stuck between like two things and trying to find the like happy in between. So I just really decided to focus on the technical, and I was like, I'll figure out what it is I want to shoot or what I want to do afterwards. And at least then I have the skills to execute it. And then from there, it was literally just like floating around like post-grad, trying to figure out like freelance, like I remember Jason staying in my class was just like, out of all of you, like all 14 of you, maybe one or two of you are going to be shooting after you graduate. And I was like, that's so harsh. But I'm like, oh, so now I'm like, that's so true. And I was talking again to Brendan Stevens about this. It's like, what was like the success in like me freelancing? And I was like, I think I was just too stubborn to like let it go because I wanted to prove to my parents that I could do a career out of this. So I was like, I'm just going to keep hustling until something sticks. And I was really, really privileged to have received a practicum at the Banff Center towards like the end of my first year, trying to freelance, trying to work part-time, trying to figure out what post-grad life is. And my mentor, Don Lee, had been shooting at the Banff Center for over 20 years. He came from a very traditional film background. And it was honestly, like, it was really hard. Like, that was like where I learned the technical and thought I knew what I was doing. Don literally taught me, like, this is how you do photography as a job. You know, you're not going to be spending hours and hours working on a photo. It's not about like building this concept. It's like, this is how you literally make money out of it. Money, like time is money. Like if you're spending more than a minute editing your photo, it's not a good photo, throw it out. And like, he would make us like put like black gaffer tape on the back of our LCD screen of our like DSLR. Cause he's like, you're going to use a light meter. You should know exactly how this photo looks like. You don't need to use the LCD screen to check your work. And he's like, it's so disruptive when you're shooting portraits or shooting with a client that you're looking at the back of your screen to check your work. So it was like all these tidbits where I was like, oh, there's like a lot I actually don't know. And if it wasn't for that practicum, I do think eventually maybe I would have been freelancing, but I don't think I would have had been as fast tracked as I was after that, because it really showed me the business side of things. So that's kind of how I've like come into photography, is like, it wasn't planned. I wasn't one of those kids that's like, I carry my camera around everywhere and take pictures of everything. It was very much like learning a skill. And I still kind of consider that, like, in terms of my artistic practice, it's very separate from my photo practice. And like, I don't know, it's hard to say, because I'm like, I feel like all these like photography buffs are like, it's a great image and like boo, boo, boo and do, do, do. I consider photography like the camera as a tool. It's a tool for creating something. I mean, I obviously have, there's like clients that I've worked with that are like really cool. Like I've loved working with like Old Beautiful Brewing Company, like doing their like product beer can stuff. Like it's like such, you know, making just like an image perfect. Like it's been like a really interesting problem to solve, but I'm never like, I don't know, I don't look at, you know, I don't read like a lot of photo books and things. And it's not because I don't appreciate photography. It's more, I'm just like, this is like a tool. It's like, I feel like it's the equivalent of like someone who works in like, I don't know, like pipe fitting, you know, like whatever. It's like, you know, it's a tool for getting the job done. Like on their spare time, yeah, they might look through like a catalog or like a instruction booklet on like different types of pipe fitting, but they're not going to be like, oh, all I want to do is look at pipe fitting kind of stuff over and over again. It's like, it's something that will help inform their practice. So that's kind of my approach to photography, which may like upset some people who are like, it's like a whole thing, whole art, a whole, yeah. And that goes into the historical connotations of photography as well, as like when it at the time, just being able to like keep an image to actually like capture something and have it stay and not just disappear. Like that was the whole premise of like daguerreotypes and all of those things that were so revolutionary, was that like people, instead of just like remembering everything in their heads, they could actually keep a physical piece of something, of a moment in time. That's what photography is capturing a moment in time. And that kind of helped, I think from there, it kind of split into like using that ability to either create art or to document it in the terms of like historical value. So,
you know, what strikes me a little bit, I mean, there's a couple things, but number one, I love glass blowing. Did you see the Netflix show with the competitive?
blown
Fuck, that's
away.
good.
Leah
That's an amazing
Cadell
show.
she was like 2 years above me, like
Oh,
in the ACAD program. Like I knew who she was, which was like also, what's his name? Alexander. He was like one of the finalists. I had gone on exchange to Philadelphia to take like a glass blowing photography dual course, like in my undergrad. Unfortunately, he was taking a sabbatical that term, but I was really looking forward to actually like having him as an instructor. So it was like really interesting to see like, oh, like there's a lot of really cool people here.
yeah. Like, I mean, I'm certainly no glass blowing aficionado. I remember like Toronto's got in the Harbourfront district a cool sort of glass blowing collective studio, so it's kind of just in the ether. But when we went to Seattle and we went to the Chihuly museum, I don't know if it's technically a museum, but when you see it expresses an art, it's fucking. I mean, it's all art and craft, but I mean, to kind of this point, you have an interesting perspective on photography, which I hear a lot with like in the wedding business and then with commercial photographers, which is the schism and the separation between a process as a fine art and a process as a commercial enterprise. And glass blowing is the same. Like you can have a Chihuly who's making impossible structures, or you can have somebody that actually makes ewers and vases and like ashtrays and shit. And likely the second one might actually be able to get paid until you know become world famous at something. There's not a lot of at least by trope, there's not a lot of financial support for practices that are just for the sake of art. And I think photography is the same thing. You know, there's an American lie about the idea of a free market that you can choose to do whatever you want and somebody out there will give you $1,000,000 for it. That's total bullshit. But I think artists really, particularly because of the way art evolved, pop art and commercial art evolved in North America, they really believe that if you just stick with your guns and make pretty pictures, someday some benefactor will come and you will get, right, a lot of money to do that. That practical mindset's fascinating. I don't have that. You know, you have a very specific and singular approach to it, which I think is important. The other thing I want, so that's number one. I think the reason why you're successful at, it sounds like securing freelance commercial is because you don't think about it as an art, at least that aspect of it.
Honestly, yeah, like I look at my classmates who are, you know, like that very typical, like I've been photographing forever and I just love it so much. I live and breathe and die by photography. And I'm like, the problem is like there are so many clients and just people out there who take advantage of that all the time. They're like, oh, you love it? Then you must love doing it for free. And for me, I'm like, I don't love photography. Like it's what I do. It's a job. So like I'm very, what's the word? I want to say like blunt, but when like people are like, oh, like, can you do this for free? I'm like, no. It's like, I don't love doing it. Like it's work. It's work for me. So like, I'm not going to do it unless I get money out of it at the end of the day. Like, and that's not to say like there isn't value in pro bono stuff too. Like if there's something you're really excited on and there's like something you get out of it, or you can get a trade or whatever, you know, like there's a line in which like, I'll be like, maybe I'll do this, but I'm not going to do like, you know, X, Y, Z. You might just get like the X only package, you know, not all the add-ons. But yeah, I find like I don't want to say like the less passionate, but like the less you love it, like the more likely you're willing to charge for it and actually make money off of it, because it is work. And for people who love it so much, you know, it sometimes doesn't feel like work, but then you get this conflict where you're investing so much time and energy, but you're not really getting anything out of it. And then you start to get really bitter towards your craft. And so I think like for me, having gone into photography, like something that I wasn't, you know, really married to necessarily, I think it was like a smart decision and giving me the technical skill set that I needed to succeed. And then like everything else kind of just sorted itself out from there. But that being said too, like freelance is not for everyone, and it's not shameful for people to, you know, take on gigs and have a part-time job. You know, like stability is a really important thing. Like I worked at ACAD for a while as like a receptionist, as a technician, and like now they like hire me for photo stuff. But like, and I even like have been on and off bartending for like since I was out of school. Like it's not, I don't know how to explain it. Like people, like even steaming clothes at like TC, like people are like, oh, like you must think that like that's a shame that like you're not doing your photography stuff at this place when like you're steaming clothes instead. I'm like, no, it's great because I can listen to podcasts and like just steam clothes and turn off. Like I don't have to like think or problem solve or anything. I literally just have to like steam wrinkles out of clothes. And it's not shameful to like have that. I think a lot of people think like because you freelance you suddenly made it, but it's like they don't see all the in between where it's like you're bailing out on commitments, or you don't really get to pick your hours. You know, your deadlines are your clients' deadlines. And like I'm really fortunate that like I have a quick turnaround. I've really like streamlined my process, but like for some people it takes them like a week or 2 weeks to like get stuff done, and then like clients are like, well, we need it tomorrow, and it's like, well, suddenly I don't have time to make dinner or do anything tonight because I need to get this done by tomorrow for the client. And a lot of it's like emails. A lot of it is, like I remember they said this in school where it's like 30% of your time is actually spent shooting, 70% is like management, which is like, it depends how good you get at management, that percentage will change. But again, like freelance is not for everyone, and you don't need to like aspire to get to that point to feel like you've made it. Like I think it's really just negotiating what works for you best. Like for me, I'm very much, I have to-do lists and sticky notes all the time. I'm a very organized individual. I don't want to say I hate working for other people, but like I hate going to jobs where people are like telling me to smile more, or like I need to be friendlier to customers or things like that, or whatever. I hated doing that when I was through school. Like I worked a lot of customer service jobs, and I was like, I don't understand why I have to smile to like enrich the customer's experience. Like it doesn't really change. But now I don't have to do that. Now I can like scowl as much as I want and go in and be completely left alone in a gallery to like photograph something, and then like they know I'm going to get the files done, and it's great. Like that, personality wise, that's a good matchup for me. But again, it's not for everyone. Is one thing I just really want to, I don't know, really point out, because I feel like a lot of people think like, oh, I just really want to freelance or really just want to be there. And I was like, again, it's like, it's not for anyone, and it's not embarrassing if it's not for you. Like you find what works.
Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and connect with me on social media. My account on Twitter is at MVFPodcast, and if you're on Instagram, you can find me at My Viewfinder Podcast. Today, I want to tell you about ATB's new podcast, The Future Of. Join Todd Hirsch, ATB's Vice President and Chief Economist, as he connects with special guests who offer unique and useful perspectives about the future. Explore how our economy and communities not only brace for change, but embrace the opportunity it creates. From the future of women in business to the changing nature of work itself, The Future Of helps understand what's coming and what we need to do today to get to the tomorrow we want. Featuring 2 episodes each month, plus bonus episodes, The Future Of includes interviews with top community and business leaders from Alberta and around the world. Subscribe to The Future Of in the Apple Store, Google Play, Spotify, and everywhere podcasts are found. And connect to ask your questions about the future by email.